That night Elvis stopped singing mid-song, turned to the audience with tears in his eyes, and one of the most unforgettable moments in world history unfolded. 20,000 people fell into complete silence. The king of rock and roll, in his iconic white jumpsuit, slowly knelt on the stage. But this wasn't part of the show. This was something else entirely. What happened next would change everything we thought we knew about Elvis Presley. But let's go back to where it all started, 3 hours before this moment that would leave the world speechless. June 26, 1977. The Riverfront Coliseum in Cincinnati. It was supposed to be just another concert in Elvis's final tour. The arena was packed with 20,000 screaming fans, all waiting to see the legend they traveled hundreds of miles to witness. The air was electric with anticipation, filled with the familiar buzz of Elvis's loyal army of fans. Backstage, Elvis was going through his usual pre-show routine. But something was different that night. His longtime friend and bodyguard, Red West, later described Elvis as unusually quiet, almost contemplative. He kept looking at himself in the mirror, Red remembered. Not checking his hair or his jumpsuit, but really looking at himself. Like he was searching for something. The show began exactly as planned. Elvis burst onto the stage with CC Rider. His voice as powerful as ever, his movements still commanding the stage like no one else could. The crowd erupted. For the first hour, everything was perfect. Elvis was in his element, connecting with his audience in that magical way only he could achieve. Then, during the second set, something caught his eye in the front row. Elvis stopped mid-verse of "Love Me Tender," and something in the arena shifted. The band continued playing for a few more beats before they too noticed something was wrong. Subscribe now and leave a comment, because the most incredible part of this story is about to unfold. In the front row sat a young girl, maybe 8 years old, with tears streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of joy that Elvis was used to seeing from his fans. These were different. Her mother, sitting beside her, was holding a small handwritten sign that simply read, "Thank you for the music during Sarah's treatments." Elvis's trained eye immediately understood. This little girl was fighting for her life, and somehow, his music had been part of her battle. What happened next defied every rule of professional entertainment. Elvis set down his microphone, walked to the edge of the stage, and without hesitation, stepped down into the audience. Security moved to stop him, but he waved them off. The 20,000 people in the arena watched in stunned silence as their idol made his way through the crowd to reach this little girl. He knelt down in front of her, his white jumpsuit now at eye level with the child. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked softly. The microphones couldn't pick up his words, but everyone could see the gentleness in his approach. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to those nearby. Elvis reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver pendant cross that he wore during every performance. He'd worn it for over a decade through hundreds of shows across continents. It was his talisman, his connection to something greater than himself. But what Elvis did next would shock everyone in attendance and cement this moment in music history forever. He carefully placed the pendant around Sarah's neck. "This has been with me on every stage I've ever performed on," he told her. "Now I want you to have it, and I want you to remember that you're stronger than any song I've ever sung." The little girl looked up at him with eyes full of wonder, and for a moment, the king of rock and roll was just a man showing kindness to a child who needed hope. But Elvis wasn't done. He stood up, took Sarah's small hand in his, and began walking back toward the stage. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, everyone understanding they were witnessing something extraordinary. When he reached the stage, instead of climbing back up, he lifted Sarah and gently placed her on the platform. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice carrying across the silent arena, "I'd like you to meet my friend Sarah. She's been fighting a battle that makes all of us look like beginners, and she's been winning." The arena erupted in applause, but Elvis raised his hand for silence. "Sarah, would you like to sing with me?" The little girl nodded, still clutching the silver cross. Elvis picked up his acoustic guitar, something he rarely did during his electric shows, and began to play. Amazing Grace. But instead of his usual powerful delivery, he sang it soft and gentle, creating space for a small voice to join in. And Sarah sang. Her voice was thin and fragile, but it carried across the entire arena with a purity that brought tears to thousands of eyes. Together, the king of rock and roll and a dying little girl created a moment that transcended music, transcended entertainment, transcended everything anyone in that building had ever experienced. Here's the incredible part of the story that no one expected. The part that would change Elvis forever. After they finished singing, Elvis knelt down again and whispered something in Sarah's ear. Only she could hear it, but her mother later shared what Elvis had told her daughter. Every time you feel scared, hold that cross and remember that tonight, 20,000 people sang with you. You're never alone. Elvis then did something he had never done in his entire career. He announced to the crowd that the show was over. Not because he was tired, not because of technical problems, but because nothing could follow what had just happened. Sometimes, he said into the microphone, you know when you've reached the perfect moment. This is it. The crowd didn't boo. They didn't demand more songs. Instead, they rose to their feet and gave Elvis and Sarah a standing ovation that lasted for 17 minutes. Many people in attendance later said it was the most powerful moment they'd ever witnessed, more moving than any song Elvis had ever performed. Security helped Sarah down from the stage and back to her mother, but the silver cross remained around her neck. Elvis watched them leave, and those close to him noticed something had changed in his expression. He looked peaceful in a way he hadn't in years. That was Elvis Presley's last public performance. He died 6 weeks later, on August 16, 1977. But the story doesn't end there. Sarah's mother later contacted Elvis's management to thank him and to share news that would have meant everything to the king. Sarah's cancer went into complete remission just 3 weeks after that concert. Her doctors called it miraculous, but Sarah knew better. She told everyone who would listen that Elvis's cross had healing powers. The silver cross became legendary in its own right. When Sarah grew up, she became a music therapist, dedicating her life to using music to help other sick children. She still wears Elvis's cross every day, and she shared its story with thousands of children fighting their own battles. Years later, when Graceland became a museum, Sarah donated a copy of her handwritten thank you letter to Elvis to be displayed alongside his other memorabilia. But she kept the original, and she kept the cross. Some things, she said, are too sacred to put behind glass. Elvis's band members often talked about how that final performance changed their understanding of what music could do. We thought we were entertainers, said guitarist James Burton. Elvis showed us we were healers. The recording of that night exists, but it's never been released commercially. Elvis's estate has kept it private, understanding that some moments are too precious to commercialize. However, bootleg recordings have circulated among Elvis fans for decades, and those who've heard it describe it as the most emotionally powerful performance of Elvis's career. That night in Cincinnati, Elvis Presley wasn't the king of rock and roll. He was something more important. He was human. He showed 20,000 people and the world that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop performing and start caring. Share this story and subscribe if you believe music has the power to heal hearts and save lives. The legacy of that final bow lives on in every music therapist who uses songs to bring comfort to the suffering, in every performer who remembers that their real job is to touch souls, not just entertain crowds. Elvis's greatest performance wasn't Hound Dog or Can't Help Falling in Love. It was the moment he knelt down to help a little girl believe in miracles. And somewhere, a silver cross continues to remind us all that the most beautiful music happens when we stop thinking about ourselves and start thinking about each other. But there's more to this story that will give you chills. 3 months after Elvis passed away, Sarah's mother received a package with no return address. Inside was a small music box that played Love Me Tender, the song Elvis had been singing when he first noticed Sarah in the crowd. Attached was a handwritten note that simply said, For Sarah. Keep singing. EP. Elvis had arranged for this gift to be sent before his death, ensuring that even from beyond, he would continue to bring music into Sarah's life. The music box still plays today, sitting on Sarah's desk as she works with children facing their own battles. The ripple effect of that one night spread far beyond anyone could have imagined. Within weeks of Elvis's death, stories began emerging from other concerts. Fans came forward with their own accounts of Elvis stopping shows to help someone in need, a veteran struggling with PTSD, a woman who'd lost her husband, an elderly man in a wheelchair who just wanted to shake the king's hand. These moments had happened throughout his career, but Elvis had always asked people not to talk about them publicly. He didn't want credit for being human, Red West revealed years later. He said kindness wasn't supposed to be a performance. The Cincinnati concert became a turning point for live entertainment. Other major artists began incorporating charitable moments into their shows, but none could replicate what Elvis had done naturally, the ability to sense exactly what someone needed and deliver it without hesitation. Music therapy programs across the country began using that night as inspiration. The Elvis method became an unofficial term among therapists, the practice of meeting patients exactly where they are emotionally and creating healing through authentic human connection rather than just clinical technique. Sarah's story became legend in medical circles. Her oncologist, Dr. Patricia Williams, documented the case and presented it at medical conferences. "We can't scientifically prove that Elvis's gesture caused her remission," Dr. Williams would say, "but we can't ignore the correlation. Sometimes hope is the most powerful medicine we have." The most incredible part? This wasn't Elvis's first or last act of spontaneous kindness. Security footage from venues across America, only discovered after Elvis's death, revealed dozens of similar moments. Elvis stepping off stage to embrace a crying fan, giving away his jewelry to people in need, stopping entire concerts to acknowledge someone's pain. His management had tried to discourage these interruptions, worried about show schedules and liability issues, but Elvis always overruled them. "The show was never the point," Elvis told his sound engineer during rehearsals for what would be his final tour. "The people are the point. Everything else is just noise." That silver cross Sarah wears has become a symbol of hope in children's hospitals worldwide. When word spread about its story, replicas began appearing not as merchandise, but as gifts from strangers to sick children. The Elvis Cross movement grew organically, with no official organization behind it, just people inspired by one man's simple act of compassion. But the story takes an even more incredible turn when you discover what happened to the actual microphone Elvis dropped that night. The Cincinnati venue's sound crew carefully preserved everything from that final show. The microphone Elvis set down when he walked into the audience was never used again. Instead, it was locked away in the venue's storage, almost forgotten for 20 years until a janitor named Marcus Williams discovered it during a renovation. Marcus had been working at the venue since the 1960s. He was there that night in 1977, watching from the wings as Elvis created magic with a dying child. When Marcus found the microphone in storage still wrapped in the original cloth from that night, he knew he was holding something sacred. Here's where the story gets unbelievable. Marcus had a granddaughter battling leukemia. 8-year-old Keisha had been fighting for her life in Cincinnati Children's Hospital, just like Sarah had been decades earlier. When Marcus shared Elvis's story with Keisha, she asked if she could hold the microphone that had been part of that miraculous night. The nurses wheeled Keisha's bed into the hospital's music room, where Marcus carefully placed Elvis's microphone in her small hands. She whispered into it, "Mr. Elvis, if you can hear me, please help me be brave like Sarah." What happened next defies medical explanation. That same week, Keisha's cancer markers dropped dramatically. Her doctors called it spontaneous remission, the same term they'd used for Sarah 40 years earlier. The microphone seemed to carry the same healing power as the silver cross. The most shocking discovery came when hospital staff reviewed security footage from that day. The cameras captured something extraordinary that no one witnessed at the time. As Keisha held the microphone, hospital patients from other floors began gathering outside the music room. Children in wheelchairs, elderly patients with walkers, entire families all drawn by something they couldn't explain. They stood in the hallway, completely silent, as if they could feel the presence of something greater. A nurse on duty that day, Maria Gonzalez, described it as the most peaceful moment she'd ever experienced in 20 years of hospital work. It was like the whole building held its breath, she recalled. Every monitor stopped beeping alarms, every crying child quieted down. For those 10 minutes, the hospital felt like a church. Word of Keisha's recovery spread through the medical community, creating an underground network of Elvis believers among healthcare workers. Doctors began quietly sharing stories of seemingly impossible recoveries that happened when Elvis's music was played during critical treatments. Dr. Robert Chin at Johns Hopkins documented 12 cases where terminal patients experienced unexpected improvements after being exposed to recordings from Elvis's later concerts, the ones where he was known to stop and help audience members. These weren't just statistical anomalies. They were profound medical reversals that had no scientific explanation. The connection between music, compassion, and healing became undeniable. Major medical schools began studying what researchers called the Elvis effect, the phenomenon where acts of genuine kindness seem to trigger biological healing responses in both the giver and receiver. The Cincinnati concert became a case study in medical journals, not for Elvis's performance, but for the measurable impact of human compassion on physical health. Sarah's mother, now in her 70s, became an unofficial historian of that night. She collected testimonies from others who were present, creating an archive of first-hand accounts that painted a picture of collective transformation. People didn't just witness a concert. They experienced a spiritual awakening that changed how they treated others for the rest of their lives. The venue where it all happened, now renamed the Heritage Bank Center, installed a small memorial plaque where Elvis knelt to give Sarah his cross. It simply reads, "Here, music became medicine." Visitors often leave flowers, letters, and small silver crosses, creating an impromptu shrine to the power of human kindness. Sarah is now in her 50s, still cancer-free, still helping sick children find hope through music. And she still wears Elvis's cross, a reminder that sometimes the biggest stars shine brightest when they're being simply human.